Hello again everyone, welcome back to my series on setting out my new home lab and going a bit OTT on a few things. This episode will be no exception to that. As you may remember in the last episode, we looked at me selecting a firewall for this lab, but hopefully giving you some ideas for yourself. And in this episode, we are going to cover actually getting that firewall up and running, and also obviously selecting a switch to start your lab off, because obviously there's no point having a firewall if you've got no easy way to connect it through to the rest of your network. Now, as I showed in the previous video, obviously here's the XG450 with its 10 gig card and additional ports that I am going to be using for my home lab. So what we need is a switch that we are going to pair up against it. Now obviously I will be connecting certain things with 10 gig ports, so that puts an emphasis on what size switch I will have to use. But let's cover some of the switches that we have available. Now, I grabbed a selection of switches that I had lying around just to give some people some ideas as to what they may require for their switching. Obviously, depending on the size of your home lab will depend on what size switch you're going to need. Obviously here, starting at the top, this is the Ubiquiti Unify Flex Mini. This is a 5-port PoE powered or USB-C powered gigabit switch. This is a managed switch but has limited management functionality just due to the fact that this is the little baby switch basically from the Ubiquiti Unify range, and is designed not to really do a lot other than maybe separate out a few port-based VLANs and not a lot else. Underneath that, we have the Netgear GS308. This is an 8-port gigabit unmanaged switch from Netgear. These are pretty cheap, can be found all over the internet basically, and these are normally what you will find hiding under desks in offices, powering 5 machines that have been snuck in over the years. Underneath that, you see we have the Netgear again. This is a GS110TP. This is a 8-port PoE gigabit switch with 2 SFP ports on it. This is a managed switch. This is one of the entry-level managed switches from Netgear. Again, reasonably priced, supports VLAN management on all the ports. Nothing particularly extensive, but they're a very good basic switch to get started with. And underneath that is the Zixel equivalent with 8 ports of PoE. Again, managed switch, no SFP ports. I believe there is a version of this switch that does have them, but this is made by obviously Zixel. Over to the left hand side, we have got the Mikrotik. I'm going to have to look at the model number on this. This is a CRS305-1G-4S+IN. Yes, Mikrotik's naming structure is always fun because it does describe what it is, but it makes it a bit more complex to read out. This is a 4-port SFP Plus switch, so this is 4 SFP Plus 10 gig ports and a single gigabit port, which also accepts PoE to power it, and it can also be powered via 2 power supplies if required on the back for high availability. This obviously again is a fully managed switch with I believe it's a Routerboard OS on it, and has quite a lot of capability built into it, but is obviously actually quite a cheap entry level into 10 gigabit networking, obviously with SFP Plus. And I believe they do a version of this that has got 4 SFP Plus ports and 4 gigabit ports on it as well, or 4 gigabit 10 gig ports that can be used as gigabit. Tucked under that, we have got the first of the full width switches. This is an Aruba Instant On. This model is the 1930 switch, but these do come in different models. Now, this is a 24-port PoE switch with 2 SFP and 2 SFP Plus ports on it. This is managed by the Aruba Instant On console and is a cloud managed switch and is part of the whole Aruba Instant On range. Again, full VLAN management capabilities. I believe this switch even supports layer 2 plus with certain layer 3 aspects, so it can actually route between traffic between VLANs if required. And then finally, underneath that, we have got a USW48 PoE Gen 2. This is one of the bigger Ubiquiti switches in their gigabit range in the Gen 2 non-Pro range. So we have got 48 gigabit ports, we have got 2 SFP ports and 2 SFP Plus ports in this switch, and it comes complete with 32 ports of PoE, including, I believe, supporting up to PoE++ on the ports on this one. So this is obviously managed by the Unify console, which you can run yourself, or you can obviously purchase a license from Ubiquiti, or as we prefer, we would use Hostify to host our central controllers. So these are the switches that I have available to me to select from, and obviously the core aspect is I am going to need at least 2 ports of SFP+. So with all of these in mind, obviously the MikroTik is in line to be used, and potentially in combination with either the Aruba or the Ubiquiti Unify switch. So with that in mind, I opted for the USW 48 Pro from Ubiquiti, which has got 48 ports of PoE and 4 SFP Plus ports to get everything set up and managed with, because, well, you know, overkill. Now I've transferred the Sophos and the Pro Switch over to my setup rack. These actually are very useful. This is a little 8U freestanding rack from, once again, Startech. These make great little racks for anyone out there who does deal with a lot of rack-mounted equipment in and out all the time. Combined with good old Rackstuds, it makes things very easy to just rack kit up, so while you're using it and configuring it, it's somewhere easily accessible, so you're not having to walk backwards and forwards to racks all over the place, and you can configure them with reasonable amounts of space, storage, etc. as you can see here. Now both the Sophos and the Pro Switch are fired up, and they are plugged into a separate plug socket with the meter on it, and just so far with them idling we are using 70-ish watts, and that was up above 100 while it was all booting up. So again, we're not going for a power efficient build this time. I will go into more power efficient versions of this kit in some other videos in the future, but this should now be all booted up, and let's go over to the machine and get this Sophos configured up with a home license ready to rock and roll. Just to quickly cover off as well, when you first fire up your Sophos XG with the software load on, as you can see here, I have port 1 with a connection down to the switch, and port 2 goes up here to my internet connection. You may find that I had in such hardware as the XG135s that you may have to plug into ports 7 and 8 instead. I have found that certain hardware revisions and versions tend to use the different ports, even though they're labelled correctly here. It may label them backwards when it loads the software. So just a heads up on that one if you are struggling to get any information out of your Sophos. Now we're all up and running, I would hope. Once you've got your Sophos actually fired up, or whatever you're using, and you've got your clean load of the Sophos SFOS software, I'm starting off with version 19 at the moment. 19.5 MR1 is the current release, and as part of the setup and configuration, we will get updated to that. But to start with, we will go to the default Sophos XGS IP, which is 172.16.16 on port 4444, and that will give us the good old certificate error, and hopefully if we go through that, we should get a nice pretty Firewall page. So what we can do is accept that, start, and the first thing we will have to do is input a new password. So I'm going to give us a nice strong new password for our Firewall, and the options you get on this page are pretty simple. Number one is you get the option to install the latest firmware automatically during setup, which is indeed recommended. Number two, you get the option to restore a backup. Now, you can restore a backup from a Sophos XG device. So you can install a hardware device to software, and you can install software to hardware, so long as they match port count. So, for example, we would not be able to restore an XG450 backup with 11 ports to an XG230 with 8 ports on it. You have to match the port count, and that way the backup can be restored. Either, I don't know if Sophos are planning to change that in the future. I would hope so, because there is the potential. I think you can go up in size, but I don't think you can down. So at some point, we'll test that for some fun. The other option is connecting as a HA spare, which we will come on to in a later video. So we will continue onwards. We'll now do the mandatory firmware update, and through the magic of editing, after I've clicked update, this will go off, perform its update, and then you can join me back again when this is done. And after that brief interlude, we're back. So we're now going to log in with admin and the password, which we just gave the unit. Now, the first thing it's going to ask us for is a firewall name. So we're going to call this a lab firewall 1, and it will ask you for your time zone, obviously where I am at the moment in the UK. So we'll stick with London, Europe. Current time, it's Sunday, March the 5th, and it's 9:12 p.m. So we go next. Now, if you haven't already got your Homelab serial number for your Sophos account, follow the link down below in the description and go and sign up. Follow the procedure to get yourself a serial number for your Homelab firewall. You can put this in at any time after this, and it will obviously limit things down. Or for the time being, I'm going to say I don't have a serial number and I want to start a trial. In fact, what I'm going to do is tick I do not wish to register. Because what this will do is, even though, as you can see here, it says connected to the internet, because it's picked up that where we have a network cable with DHCP providing an IP address in WAN that is effectively port 2, which is the WAN port on this firewall, we can register with Sophos. I'm going to skip for now because we'll come back to that in a second. And that will put us into evaluation mode for 30 days. Now you can choose to opt in and out of the experience. I'm going to opt out for the time being and go continue. And this is where you can set up some of your network connection details. Now, you can obviously specify which port you would like to be your main LAN port. You will see here that port 1, 10, 11, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to port 9 there. Port 2 is missing because that is predefined on the setup as the WAN port. And you can actually edit your internet connection settings, edit internet connections, and it will specify which port you wish to configure. Again, you can change your WAN port should you wish to. You can specify whether it's a static or a dynamic IP. On this part of the setup, you can also, I believe, looking for it now, change. No, what you cannot specify is if you have a PPPoE connection, you will have to wait until you are up and running and working before you can specify your username and password for that connection. So when you are setting up your Sophos firewall, make sure that you have an existing router already on the internet, I would suggest, and then you can migrate your connection into the relevant port on the firewall. So for LAN IP address, by default, obviously we're on the 172.16.16.16 range. Obviously, in keeping with private IP addressing, we're going to start with a 172.16, but I'm going to change that to .1.1 because I don't use that IP address anywhere else in my network. So we're going to keep 172.16.11, and we are going to go make sure, yeah, the DHCP has updated itself. That will mean that the file will be issuing DHCP out. and then we're going to click continue on that. Now at the end of this wizard, the aim is to get you connected on the internet with a basic set of firewall rules up and running. So what it will ask is a few settings. Now I'm going to leave all of these unticked by default because I want to go in later on and specify that as we continue along the path of getting this in place in the rack to help do its job. We will go through and turn on each of these via the actual rules themselves. So I'm just going to click continue on that, and it's also going to ask me then for notifications. I'm going to untick the send configuration backup every week because later on we'll be setting this backup to Sophos Central, but you can specify an encryption password for the backup that it sends via email should you require it. Recipient's email address, we will go with support in the IT.com because that doesn't exist. And for me, I can just tell it to send from the same address. I'm not fussed about this because in production, this is my lab. And if I want to go and change it later, I shall. So go continue, and that gives us a rundown of our firewall name, location, IP address is all set up, the default network rule settings, which everything is in default on that, is create a link NAT rule, which we'll go in and have a look at in a bit. And what we will now do is finish, and that will go off and get itself ready. And you can join me when the unit is back up and running after doing its configuration changes, as it will take a few minutes. And I will log back in, and we should hopefully be at the dashboard. Now we're back up and running on the new IP address. I've signed myself in already on this one. And you can see here that the dashboard basically gives you an oversight as to what's going on. Currently, we have got up in the corner the system status. Everything is green, so everything is happy. If you have a small firewall and you are putting a lot of traffic through it, the performance indicator will shift through green to orange to red. Depending on how much of a load it is, and obviously the more loaded you put on the firewall, and if it's above what the processor and memory can cope with, yes, you will start to notice slowdowns and performance issues. But for what we're going to do, it should be fine. We've got stuff particularly related to services that you may be using. So connected remote users would show you how many VPN users are in. Live users are how many users that are authenticated to your firewall. Wireless APs, self-explanatory. And red connections. Well, Sophos red connections are remote Ethernet devices, and these are either physical pieces of hardware or other Sophos XG devices that are using a red tunnel to connect in. We then get some more statistics with CPU, memory capacity, current bandwidth, what percentage of the decryption capacity of the hardware is in use at the moment, how many sessions and how many actual decryption sessions are on that. We will show and touch later on in another video when we start to play with SSL inspection. High availability here is obviously down to not configured at the moment because we only have one device. And we've got the uptime. You can see how many firewall rules are active and the current traffic that is going through on those rules. So we can see here we've got 2 user rules and 3 network rules. You get a nice, pretty dashboard area showing you what is obviously being allowed, what is currently been detected and blocked, and more traffic information building up. Again, a lot of this for a home firewall will be unused, but if you use Sophos as your endpoint antivirus, and you are using the Sophos client, it will start to check in with the firewall, and you will gain some additional visibility as to what is going on in your network. The SSL TLS connection, again, that will start to make more sense as we turn on TLS inspection, which later on down the line when we start to do some throughput testing on some firewalls. Over here on the left hand side obviously are all the options. Now if we go into network, I will quickly run through, best of my ability, how Sophos organizes their physical interfaces and what they call zones. Now, an interface in a Sophos firewall is either a physical interface or a virtual interface. So that can either be a bridged interface, which bridges either two physical ports together or a physical and a virtual port together. An alias, which is you can add an alias to a port or a virtual port, which adds an additional IP address to it. You can add a VLAN, which is basically tagged uh, virtual port. You can add a link aggregated connection, which will combine multiple ports, and you can add a red connection, which allows you to either add in a remote Ethernet device, physical device, or a remote Ethernet device link to another Sophos firewall. Now, in this list of all the ports you can see here, we've got port 1 all the way down to port 9 there, and port 10 and 11 up here. You will see that we have got currently port 1, which is connected. There it is with its IP address, and it is a physical port, but underneath it you can see it says LAN, and that is the zone it is in. We look at port 2, again, it's a physical device, and you can see that it's our DHCP address because it's connected to another one of my little internal networks to get its address, but it's on the WAN zone. Now, Sophos uses zones to basically specify what services are available on that port. Now, you create many zones as you need, but by default, you end up with LAN, WAN, DMZ, VPN, and Wi-Fi. For the time being, we'll ignore these bottom three. Wi-Fi we don't use because we don't have any APs on this. VPN we don't use at the moment, and DMZ again, not really used nowadays. You would create your own zone for anything specific for that. So that leaves us with LAN and WAN. And as you can see, so the LAN zone currently has port 1 as a member. It's the type of zone is a LAN, which Sophos's definition effectively is a LAN is just a normal network connection. And the device is able to use the following services. To go in and manage that zone, you can see we can actually turn on and off services for that zone. So we have HTTPS, SSH available to be administrative services, so you can connect to this portal basically, or you can SSH in should you require it. We have authentication, captive portal. We don't have Active Directory SSO on, but we do have Radius SSO on, and we have Chromebook SSO. Networking services, it will respond to DNS requests and ping or IPv6 ping requests. And it also has the web proxy, the SSL VPN tunnel available, wireless protection, again, not using the user portal for downloading client VPNs, etc. Dynamic routing is off for this zone at the moment, but SNMP and SMTP relay is on. Now, you can create your own zones and you can specify what services you want on each one. A lot of the time when you're creating a zone, it's specific use case. We will end up creating some later on video series, but for now, we'll leave that alone. The next zone is obviously the WAN zone. Now, you can see there are no device actual services assigned to this. And if we go into this, you will see that certain actual parts of this are not available. Now, the WAN zone, you cannot create more than one WAN zone. You can assign multiple ports to the WAN zone, but you cannot create more than one. You can specify actually if you want any port in that zone to respond to pings. You can actually then specify want dynamic routing on that, the user portal to be accessible, but by default, unless the services are turned on, there should be nothing accessible on a Sophos Firewall WAN port when you set it up. This is, again, part of the course, and that's how it should be. You should have nothing available on your WAN. Now, if we go into rules and policies, you will see that we have got the default layout, which includes 3 groups: traffic to internal zones, traffic to WAN, traffic to DNZ, and then we've got an auto-added firewall policy for message traffic, which allows anything to go out via SMTP and SMTPS. And then we've got a default firewall rule, which you will want to edit later on, which is a LAN any to WAN any on any service. Now, we go in and have a look at this. You can see this is the default network policy, and by default, this allows anything coming in from a LAN zone from any network to access anything in a WAN zone on any network. This is what allows the initial setting up and allows you to start defining rules on your firewall. You can leave this rule in place, or you can start creating your own, or you can modify this rule if you want to. You can obviously go in and start adding web filtering on. If you are using synchronized security, again, you can turn synchronized security on to improve the security of your network if you are a Sophos endpoint user. And then you can start turning on IPS, traffic shaping, etc., etc. Again, we'll leave this as it is for now, but we'll touch on that once we've got some new networks created in a later video, and we've started to get certificates in place for clients, etc. Now, other than that, the only other places that are worth checking straight away, obviously, if you haven't already, if you go into administration, you have licensing. I've deferred the licensing on this device, but I can go and actually register this device for the ability to then, so if I click here, it will then take us back to this familiar page, which I can fill in home serial number. And when I fill in the home serial number and synchronize the license, it will then reboot the firewall and restrict it down to 4 cores and 6 gig RAM. So if you are using like this an 8-core machine, obviously it will slow that ability down. But to be honest, you're not going to notice it unless you're starting to root out 10 gig in at the moment. So that is something that we will do some testing on in another video with the access to the other Sophos firewalls that I do have. And we will also do some hardware comparisons with things like pfSense, OpenSense, and any other open source firewalls that are sensible to deploy on hardware. If you have any suggestions, obviously I know of pfSense, OpenSense, Untangled, which I believe is now called Arista. Any viable next gen firewalls that offer a free or a trial version of their software, I would be interested in those. If you can comment down below, I would appreciate that. I'm going to tell this that I don't wish to register now. Again. And we'll go back to here. Now, the only things I would suggest turning on pretty sort of much straight away is go into intrusion prevention, into the IPS policies, just turn IPS on. And if we go into advanced threat protection, turn on advanced threat protection and change the policy to log and drop. And that in itself will enable a few services. We haven't turned anything great on at the moment, but that will start the firewall downloading the relevant updates behind the scenes, ready for when we start to set some rules. Now this has got this firewall up and running. It has got this device connected to the internet. In the next video, I'm going to go through actually getting a couple of networks set up. We will go through setting up VLANs on a Sophos firewall, and obviously we get the Unify 48 ports Pro switch that I have here adopted onto a cloud key just to keep networks internal for the time being. And we will go from there and obviously start expanding out and connecting in the 10 gig ports on this firewall. Doing that will enable us to then start to link into some of the servers that in my other obviously server series that I'm doing. We'll get some of them loaded up as well and start to do some testing with some heavier traffic routing through firewalls. Again, the aim is to be able to demonstrate, obviously, what can be done on a firewall, what done on a Sophos XG, Sophos firewall, I should call them now, and how adding additional services and additional parts to inspection on firewalls increases the load, which again will slow down connections. But you are looking at using a firewall in a business environment and learning how firewalls need to be configured and effectively set up in the real world to ensure that all data in and out of a network that is worth scanning actually gets scanned and intercepted, rather than a lot of traffic, which unfortunately, with the way of the world now, everything is being encrypted. And if you are not scanning encrypted traffic in and out of your network, you are missing the bulk of traffic in and out of your network. So there we go. Um, Hopefully this series will be useful to some people. Again, as ever, please comment with any ideas or anything you'd like me to demonstrate or cover in this series down below in the comments. I endeavour to answer people where I can, and hopefully this will prove useful to some people as a viable firewall option for their home lab, because I've been using Sophos XGs now for many years, and they do a brilliant job in my opinion. I will obviously start to look at I should say. I've already looked at them many times. Some of the other firewall manufacturers or firewall services and software, including the free and maybe even some of the paid ones later on, because what the plan is on this series, in the next couple of videos, I'll be covering off the servers that I have here to do some speed tests. So we'll get some speed test servers built up, and we'll do some stress testing and demonstrate throughput and route, and obviously connection or way that the Sophos XG firewall solutions actually can be used to intercept traffic to and from different networks or internet, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me. I hope this has been somewhat useful to you all, and I will catch you in the next one. Please do feel free to like, share, subscribe, all the normal stuff, and I'll catch you later.